every athlete, especially if they don't have injury, especially young athletes, our biggest niche is the high school athlete. They want to increase performance. You hear the twitchier, you know what I mean, or the stiffer, the more elastic athlete is what's going to help increase performance. You know what I mean, quicker off the ground, get off the ground faster, jump higher. I hear you talk a lot about making the tendon stiffer. You know what I mean? What's that about? And how does that increase performance, and why are we trying to do that?
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, the tendon lies between the muscle and the bone. And if we talk about stiffness, for all of those, the muscle is going to be the least stiff and the most. Maybe we could put it on a spectrum of like stiffness and compliance. If something can be very compliant, which means it's going to stretch quite a bit, versus something very stiff is not going to stretch much at all, or change its or deform much, change its shape. So a bone is the most stiff. A bone is going to be more stiff than a tendon, and then a tendon is going to be more stiff than a muscle. So yeah, when you talk about an athlete being more explosive, running faster, whatever they have to do, they have to move their skeleton faster. That's really what they're doing, moving their skeleton. And the thing that operates to move them is the muscles. The muscles do everything. So I think people have made the categories of like the muscle dominant athlete versus like the tendon driven athlete. And it's like, well, there's no way around it. You have to use the muscle. Everyone's going to be using the muscle. So, yeah, why do we want the tendons stiff? Because when the muscle is going to pull on the tendons, you want them to pull on a tendon that is stiff, so that it's like a stiffer, think of like a rubber band. You could have a really compliant rubber band where if you pull it, it'll extend quite a bit, and then you don't get that much out of it when you release it. But if the rubber band is stiffer, or even think of like a bigger rubber band, stiffer, bigger, you're going to pull on it and it's going to store a lot more energy in it than the more compliant, smaller rubber band. So you're storing more energy in that rubber band, and then when you decide to I guess if you're pulling a rubber band with your fingers, when you decide to release it, it's gonna release much more energy. So like, I guess you store a lot more potential energy, and then you can release much more kinetic energy. So yeah, when it comes to tendons, you're never either. The only thing really the tendon can do is it can become stiffer if you train it, like an athlete. If you load it fast and if you load it heavy, and just loading it in general is going to make the tendon stiffer. Because the cells within are going to sense that it's getting loaded. The cells are going to kick out collagen, try to cross-link the collagen, make the whole structure a stiffer structure. So yeah, everything you do as an athlete, sprinting, jumping, lifting weights, holding isometrics, I think all of those things work to get the tendon to be a stiff structure, to get the tendon stiffer. And then it's periods where they don't do anything, where you're just really inactive. That's when the tendon will get more compliant. So it's like detraining the tendon. Or if you injure the tendon, like get a partial tear or get tendinopathy, it goes through this process where it gets more compliant because it has to heal. So you're getting more fluid in the tendon, you're getting more of the immature, more extendable types of collagen within the tendon. So yeah, that's the way I look at tendons, is you just have a set tendon, and then if you do want to make it stiffer because it's going to be better for performance. And the way to make it stiffer is just to be active, to load the tendon heavy, load the tendon slow, load the tendon fast, load the tendon light. All those things are going to help make the tendon stiffer. And the things that are going to make the tendon lose its stiffness are detraining, getting injured, doing nothing. So yeah, that's in my head, that's where things are. I know one guy, Keith Barr out there in California, has said that the slow things make the tendon more compliant and the fast things make the tendon stiffer. But I feel like that is based off of not like smaller pieces of research. I think I think any type of loading is going to make the tendon stiffer. And I have the liberty of speaking to basically all of the tendon researchers, or all the tendon groups at least, and that's the conclusion I've arrived at, is loading the tendon makes it stiffer, period, and unloading the tendon makes it lose its stiffness and become more compliant. Yeah.
I've heard you talk before, with a healthy tendon, you like more of the overcoming isometrics. Correct? Usually not in deep ranges of motion, right?
Yeah,
like
well, it
it
kind of depends. Yeah, the overcoming isometrics, I think, for a healthy tendon, I would say healthy and trained, because we were talking about like the high school younger groups, and just imagine putting
Yep.
them on an overcoming isometric when it's like a 12-year-old kid. Like they don't even know how to push, they don't have the ability to push. So it's like it's almost like having them do a 1 rep max back squat. They don't have the coordination, they don't have the ability for you to even reach their outputs. So what's the point of doing a 1 rep max with them? You could do sets of 20. You could like quote unquote slow cook them and do higher rep ranges, 20 reps, so they can get the coordination, they can get the movement down, and it's just better. It's just better for them. And then once they adapt to those 20 reps, you can break it down to 15, 10, 5, and then over many months, many years, they can start lifting very heavy, and that just makes the most sense. It's kind of like you always have somewhere you can take them because you started so basic and you kind of milked out the basics. So yeah, with the overcoming isometrics, I would put the caveat that the overcoming isometrics are really good for the already healthy tendons that you want to make even stiffer, but also those athletes should be pretty experienced. They should be experienced in general, but also they should be experienced with lifting and knowing what lifting feels like, because you could take an experienced athlete who's like, I mean, I love basketball. You could take a 25-year-old basketball kid who's the best kid on the court. He's never touched a weight in his life. He's experienced, but he's not experienced in a weight room. So what's the point of doing an overcoming isometric? And yeah, I just think if you don't have that coordination, you could, so the 1 rep max back squat is the same as an overcoming isometric for me. And then the sets of 20 is going to be more of the yielding longer duration isometrics, like 30-second isometrics, or maybe even multiple minute long isometrics. So yeah, that is the caveat. Is I think the injured tendons are good with the yielding, and the inexperienced kids are good with the yielding. And then if you're very trained and you're very healthy, the overcoming can be good. But it's also like, there's benefit to doing it all. Even if you're at the top, there is benefit to doing the longer duration isometrics, because now you're working a different energy system. You're working a more long duration energy system, maybe more glycolytic, and you're just getting different adaptations. I don't think you're probably not getting different adaptations with the tendon, because that tendon needs a very high strain, which you need to use overcoming to get. But you're going to be adapting other things, because the tendon's attached to the muscle, and there are so many ways for you to adapt the muscle and get thorough development of the muscle. And the more thoroughly developed the muscle is from like an energy system standpoint, and from just developing the architecture fully, from like doing different positions or doing different rep ranges, maybe that's gonna carry over to health of the tendon. But yeah, you're on the right track with that the overcoming for healthier tendons is better.
Talking with Cressy, I think it's a simple framework. It's just like what you said, trained versus untrained. I think that you see the Instagram stuff, you see all the cool shit, and it's like, that's with an athlete that's extremely trained, knows what they're doing, and they can work their way through it. Because even the overcoming isometric, even though it doesn't look like it's a hard movement, there's a lot of skill to a overcoming isometric, like learning how to push, learning how to actually feel yourself increase that force. But that framework has been huge for us.
Yeah, and I always say this too with the overcoming is, so like, yeah, if I don't know, if people are listening, they don't know overcoming, it's like pushing, it's like doing say for example a leg extension, pressing against the pad as hard as possible, and you can't move it. That's how hard you're pushing, and you're really, there's really no point in doing that overcoming isometric for more than like 5 seconds, because your force output's going to drop off. So yeah, like 3 seconds is probably good. And then for a calf raise, you could do a seated calf, press as hard as you can for like 3 seconds, or a standing calf, press as hard as you can. And that's typically against something immovable. The thing is with the immovable overcoming isometrics, yeah, they're great because they get so much torque at that joint from the muscle, which then pulls on the tendon, and then you get really good tendon strain or tendon length change, which is the stimulus to adapt the tendon, is getting a big stretch on the tendon. The problem with the overcoming is if you don't have a force plate, or you don't have like a crane scale or something to give you a reading, no athlete is going to want to do that session after session. You just lose motivation. I don't want to do it. I've tried it. I've done overcoming leg extension isometrics with like those TRX straps. I would just hook up a TRX strap around my foot and then put it on the bench and then push as hard as I can and do it for like 30 seconds. And I mean, I love lifting, so like I'm okay with it. But after like I was doing that for weeks, it was after COVID because I was dealing with some left patellar tendon pain. from like jumping on concrete every day. And I was doing that every day, sometimes twice a day, many sets, just to try to get like a health stimulus in my tendon. And I don't know how hard I'm pushing, you know? I think I'm pushing hard, but it's like doing it for 30 seconds, I'm just like, my force output has to be dropping off so much versus if I was to get on a leg extension and set the pin at a certain weight, like 100 pounds, and hold it, I know that I have to be supporting 100 pounds the whole time. So if you're going to do overcoming isometrics, I think you should stand on a force plate so someone can have a reading, or you can have a scale that's going to be testing how much of a pull is going through that. And those are useful. Otherwise, yielding is amazing because when you do a yielding isometric, you're going to be holding a weight. So that's your feedback. Your feedback is, can I hold this joint position with this set amount of weight that I'm holding? And if I can't hold it, the joint position is going to change. So there's the feedback. And I think athletes need, as basic as that is, you need some level of feedback to stay motivated.
Yeah. We staying with the healthy tendon for now. We struggle sometimes with like volume, like how much we can train it, right? The density that we can put in a week, you know? Say if it was just on the patellar tendon, you know what I mean? If you're trying to focus on that, how much is too much, or how much, and I know each person is different, but how much are you attacking that, you know, when and say you used to be in the college strength world, I believe, right? Say you're working with a large group, say you're doing something like that. If you were trying to check all your boxes, you know, what would the volume, what would the density look like when you're trying to attack the tendons?
Yeah. Okay. So like I had a lot of sports, and some of them patellar tendon does not matter. Like swimming, like who cares with swimming? They're not going to get jumper's knee. Yeah. Although weirdly, I've had a phone consult with one guy for many months. He had a Olympic swimmer, who tore his patellar tendon in the first call. I'm like, how did he tear his patellar tendon as a swimmer? And he tore it jumping outside of training. You know, he was jumping outside of training. We're
training a girl right now with a torn ACL, swimmer. She was playing kickball in PE, rounded the base, put her foot down, and PE tore ACL. And she's going to be a Division I swimmer. She got back in the water really, really fast. But that's been interesting with an ACL. Sorry.
And it's kind of good, I guess, rehabbing that ACL or rehabbing this patellar tendon, because it's like the demand when they get out of it is not that extreme. Like, sure, you want them to return to normal training. Maybe you want her to return to like being able to play kickball, and this swimmer wants her to be able to return to doing jumps again. But they don't need the patellar tendon demand of like a ton of decels like a basketball player would, or a ton of jumps and lands like a basketball player would, or a football player. So yeah, the ending stage of rehab is like doesn't have to be as aggressive if you don't really have a high demand. So yeah, when you're talking about like how much volume for that patellar tendon, I think I would just look at the sport, and I'm like, if it's a swimmer, whatever, it's like a golfer, whatever. If you get to like tennis, basketball, American football, soccer, then it's like, okay, the patellar tendon is getting stressed so much from the sport because of the jumping and landing, the decelerations, the change of directions, and then I guess you get some with acceleration too. So I would just kind of look at the sport and be like, how much of the sport is being done, and if they're already doing a ton of that stuff, it's like, I don't know, I don't think I want to. Like, I probably might be a little bit careful with like how much I'm loading the quads, how much I'm loading the patellar tendon. So I'm probably looking at from like a minimum effective dose thing. And I guess if you're getting them 2-3 times a week, and you're going to be doing like full body training, I think you're getting. So I love looking at the way I look at the tendons is it started from being a strength coach. So I was a strength coach for like a decade, college strength coach, high school, then college strength coach. And I look at all the tendon stuff from my lens of like being a strength coach and saying, how can I look at everything I already do and what's happening with the tendons, you know? So I'm not like looking at everything I already did, which is like quote unquote good strength and conditioning, and being like, we need to scrap everything and change it all for patellar tendon. So there was a study on, I think they did half squats, and they looked at the actual strain on the patellar tendon. So to kind of tell this story with like, we're trying to adapt the patellar tendon to get stiffer, and the adaptation, how to adapt the tendon is going to be based on the strain levels of the patellar tendon. So if we just throw out a number, and I think this is a really easy way to understand it, and it varies with each person, but if the patellar tendon, it has a resting length, like say it's here, and then if it stretches like 10% of its resting length, it's going to snap. It's going to rupture. If we just say 10% is the ultimate strain. So you can strain that thing at 8%, 9% and be fine. And they're going to go get that a ton in sports. And there's a group in Germany who looked at what is the percentage of strain we need to hit in training to get like a quote unquote adaptive response out of a tendon. And they have this number based on all these studies they've done. It was like 4.5 to 6.5% strain. They want to see that number in the weight room training sessions. And then it kind of tells them that exercise that I did strained the patellar tendon, so I'm going to get an adaptive response. And all that strain is stretching the tendon. And then I guess when I say stretching, people would think, oh, I could just do a quad stretch. I could just do like put my shin against the wall, do that deep couch stretch, and I'm going to strain the patellar tendon. But that stretch, I don't think they've studied that exactly. They have studied the Achilles tendon, and if you do like a shove your knee to the wall, do a calf stretch, you're only really straining the tendon like 1%. And the Achilles, if the strain is the same, maybe it's 10% before it snaps or 15% before it snaps. If you're straining it 1%, like that's not getting an adaptive response. So you're not adapting the tendon at all doing a static stretch. What you need to get strain out of the tendon is you need the muscle, the associated muscle, to work really hard. And that's what's going to pull on the tendon, and that's what's going to cause the stretch on the tendon. So this study, long-winded way of saying, this study they did on half squats, I think they did loads of like 60% one rep, or no, I think 40% one rep max, 50%, 60%. And I think all through that range, they saw really big strains. So they already, I think it was at like, I don't know, I think it was maybe at like 50% of the one rep max. They already were seeing like a 4 or 5% strain in the patellar tendon by just doing a half squat, doing a barbell on their back, doing a half squat. And then as they increased the loads higher, like 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 maybe, the strains got higher and higher because the quad muscle is working harder and harder as you put more weight on it. So yeah, I looked at that and I'm just like, I think if you're just taking these athletes, you have them 2 to 3 times a week, and you're doing quad exercises like a knee dominant squat, or you're doing like a split squat, or maybe you're doing a leg extension. And if you're lifting a decently heavy load, like they're doing sets of maybe 10, or maybe they're doing sets of 5, and then if you have really inexperienced kids and they're doing sets of like 20 on a squat, I think their tendons are already so compliant, you're probably getting a really adaptive response out of that set anyways. It's the ones who are more advanced that probably need a heavier and heavier weight because that tendon is already so stiff that you need to lift a heavier load to even get a stretch on that tendon, because it's like that really thick rubber band. It's hard to stretch when you're experienced. So that's why to further the adaptation, you probably need a heavier load. So yeah, I just go back and I'm like, I look at everything I did for, I guess the big sport that I mostly cared about or spent my time with was women's basketball or men's women's basketball when I was a college strength coach. And I just look at my lifting sessions and I'm like, we were doing knee dominant stuff. We were doing heavy squats. We were doing heavy split squats, like heavy lunges, and we were taking care of the quads and patellar tendon. And I guess if I really wanted to isolate it, I felt like someone had a history of jumper's knee, or someone was like going down that path. Then I probably would throw them on a leg extension and be like, let's really focus on loading the quads without hiding. Because if you do a squat, people can sit back. They can not load the quads. If they do a split squat, same thing. They can keep the shin really vertical or even have like a negative shin angle. So they're going to avoid loading the quads. So yeah, I think it just takes like the coach's eye of being like, if we're doing a strength exercise and I'm doing this for the quads and for the patellar tendon, let's make sure we're actually loading the quads and patellar tendon. And you've seen like those heel wedges. I mean, you could probably just put a heel wedge under their foot when they're doing a squat, and that's going to make their knee translate forward, and they're going to be loading the quads a bit better. So, yeah, as far as like how much is the volume, I think if you got them 2-3 times a week, if you're just doing a reasonable amount of sets, like 4 sets of 5 or 3 sets of 10 or whatever it is on the knee dominant stuff, you're going to be adapting the muscle, and then you're also going to be adapting the tendon. And then, yeah, if you want to throw in isometrics and stuff, you could do that. But I think the kids who stay healthy, the kids who stay healthy with the patellar tendons, I guess, and Achilles tendons, I think what they have in common is maybe a history of doing multiple sports and then being consistent with strength training. Like those are the kids where like maybe their parents have money and they can send them to a strength coach for the entire year, and that's the consistent stimulus they need to keep their muscles really strong. And by keeping their muscles really strong, they're also stiffening up their tendons. So yeah, I think me being a strength coach in the past and then going into tendons, I really just look at everything in the tendon world, and it just justifies what I kind of knew as a strength coach for how to keep people healthier in the long run, how to keep them away from tendon issues, you know?
Yeah, I love it. So now let's move to what causes these tendon issues. You know what I mean? What causes this anterior knee pain, this jumper's knee? Like when is it the shape of the athlete? Is it the activity, the sport? Obviously, you know, jumping in basketball and cutting so much in tennis on a hard surface. You know what I mean? Is it, you know, untrained going from 0 to 100? You know what I mean? But we have a bunch of young athletes, and if, again, we might train with the team, we might train 40 kids at one time, you know what I mean? And we're squatting and moving, and we're trying to do everything that we can. You've been in there, but everything that we can to make sure the movement quality is as high as possible. But you might have 2 kids with that anterior knee pain, and they might even be guys that are like grinders and do everything that you ask, you know what I mean? It's like, where do you think that this pain's coming from, and why is it starting?
Okay, I think, oh my God, there's too many variables. One of them that comes to mind immediately when you say like 40 kids and then there's 2 of them. So I recently, I went to London, and there's a couple tendon guys there, Jared Amflick and John Houghton, and they see a ton of patellar and Achilles every day they run clinic, and they kind of exposed me to the genetic influence. There's a gene, I forget what the gene is called, but and I also forget the exact story, but Jared was kind of saying if you have a team of like 40 people, you're probably going to have like 2 or 3 with this genetic, not abnormality, but genetic effect where like they're more prone for a tendon issue. So it could just be genetics that some people run into a tendon issue. Another one could be if they have the patellar tendinopathy at the bottom of the knee. It could be patella alta, so it could be their shape, like the way that they were structurally built. And I think this more so happens when you have people with long legs. Yeah, I think it happens more with people with long legs, that it's patella alta, so their kneecap naturally sits up higher on their knee. So you can just think if the patella is sitting up higher, the patellar tendon is going to be more stretched out. And then you could also have the shape of the patella itself. There was a study on I think it was Japanese cadavers a long time ago, and I don't know why they haven't done another study, but they saw 3 different patella types. Like one of them was kind of a more round. The bottom of the patella had like a pointed shape, or it had a blunt shape, or one like a normal shape. And the pointed shape, they were kind of speculating that if it's really pointed, that bone is really pointed, that patella has to wrap around, and it might be causing like some impingement or compression, and that's the location where people get the jumper's knee. So it could be the shape of their patella. The thing is, with all these things I'm saying, is like there's nothing you can do. You can't do anything about patella alta. You can't do anything about the shape of your patella. You can't do anything about your genes. So really, then it just becomes management. Like how do we manage these people? And I think the management side is like, if you're a young kid, you're doing a single sport, that's not good. If you're just doing one thing, there's quite a bit of research on like Osgood-Schlatter disease going up, patellofemoral pain going up. And I kind of look at those single sports, if it's like they're just playing soccer, like that's not good. But if they follow strength, if they go to a strength coach and they're lifting year round, I look at that as like another sport, you know, like that is variation in and of itself by being a part of a lifting program. So you can go and do your single sport, but if you do that in conjunction with lifting, now it's like all of the overloads, like all the repetitive overuse that you get from that sport, you can come in the weight room, and now you're giving your body variety, and you're loading slowly. So you're probably strengthening the weakened areas instead of by just going and playing your sport and doing everything that you already do. You're just strengthening the strong areas, and then the weak areas are getting further weakened because you're just going to do what you're good at. Versus playing a different sport, you probably have to move a little bit differently, or get some different movement vocabulary. Or if you go in the weight room, you're getting a different stimulus. So yeah, I think variation And then, yeah, what was the question again on how to manage these?
I was just wondering why the pain
Yeah, why
actually
they come
starts
about.
to
Yeah,
occur.
and then I think too is the biggest. I think you see this with all musculoskeletal issues, is the peaks and valleys in activity. You know, is taking a bunch of time off, and then so yeah, the valley. You have a big valley where you just took 3 months off, and then it's like, all right, season's starting. Let's have another peak, and then you show up to first day of basketball. It's like, all right, we're gonna play for 3 hours today, practice, and then we're gonna do that tomorrow and the next day, and it's like now you just had a whole week of 5 days a week, 15 hours of basketball, and if you did nothing to prepare for that, that is the peak and valley effect. And your tendons don't like that, your muscles don't like that, your bones don't like that. I mean, you see the bone stress injuries in like runners, people that just jump into it too quickly. Yeah, nothing,
Yep.
none of the structures in your body like the peaks and valleys, and the tendons definitely don't. So I think that's the big one, the peaks and valleys. It's just about being consistent with your loading. Like stay active with the sport you're in, or if you can. That's why seasons are so good. You have a basketball season, you have a baseball season, you have a cross country season, a track and field season. If you can be active in all of those seasons, you're getting variation for your body and you're kind of staying away from that overuse. And then put on top of that a regular, consistent strength and conditioning plan. And I think that's how tendons are going to stay healthy. I think if you just look at this, so I think this is the same. This is the same for any injury, but um, the best risk factor for jumper's knee is whether you had jumper's knee in the past. So if you want
Yeah.
to mess someone's life up with jumper's knee, then give them jumper's knee when they're 12 years old, you know, and give them a love for basketball. And it's like, because you had jumper's knee at 12, you are more likely to get it the rest of your life. I mean, that's what happened to me. I had it when I was 18, and it went from my right leg, and then it went to my left leg, and then it just jumps back and forth. And it's like, I manage it, and I do good training, and I try to stay smart with the amount of like jumping and dynamic stuff that I do. But I also know that I was messed up when I was 18. I messed it up when I was young because I didn't know these things. And if I could have just been smart and had a coach like guide me along and help me like stay away from these pains, then you don't have the future of pain. So I think for me, anytime I go have these peak and valley things, because like life gets in the way, or injury or illness or something, I have a big valley, and then I'm like, I might be stupid and have a peak. Like it's going to manifest in my patellar tendon again. I'm going to manifest with patellar tendon pain, versus someone who had a history of shin splints is going to manifest as shin splints, or someone has a history of Achilles tendinopathy is going to manifest as Achilles tendinopathy. So, yeah, I think staying away from these tendon issues when you're young is the best way to have a future of not having to worry about tendons.
Yeah, that patella alta, man. If you're a long lever athlete, somebody with long legs, and you play basketball, so that's just they're set up for
I
failure
think so. Yeah,
already.
I would like to. I don't know if that's completely accurate, but it just makes sense for me. Where it's like, and that's also like a medical diagnosis where you have to get an X-ray with the knee. The knee might need to be bent like 30 degrees or something, and they kind of look at it from the side to see how high it's sitting. Yeah. So, but for some people, I guess you can just look at these long lever athletes, and it's like maybe that's patella alta, but maybe too, it's like their legs are so long that they can produce so much they might not be good at a like ATG back squat. They might squat like 135, but if you put them on a movement where they're really advantageous with their quads and they can really push, they're probably going to be stronger than the other athletes, because they're just set up to be able to produce a ton of torque at their knees, and that just lends itself to damaging the tendon. It's like if you the higher the higher the outputs, the more chance of injury, you know. And maybe for some people that's like hard to grasp. I try explaining that to people that know nothing about performance, and they're like, I don't understand. And I'm like, okay, just imagine this: if I drop you off of a 40-inch box, that's a lot of stress to manage. If I drop you off a 20-inch box, it's less stress to your body. You know, if you have higher outputs, you naturally are degrading your body more. So yeah, these long lever athletes that can probably produce a ton of torque with their knees, that's just going to lend itself to more tendon stress. So you seen the Avengers? You watch yeah.
Yep.
So like, oh man, Endgame. I think Endgame. Marvel just sucks now, but like back in the day, Marvel, those movies are pretty good. But the Thanos had that quote, which like was so weird. When he destroyed the stones, he's like, "I use the stones to destroy the stones," and I use that meme to say, like I used it with Achilles, but it works for the jumpers. It's like I use the patellar tendon to destroy the patellar tendon. So it's like the athletes who really can use their patellar tendon well are the ones who destroy their patellar tendon. It's not the kids who, like, sure, you get kids who are unathletic who get tendon issues, and it could be lifestyle, or it could be peaks, it could be all the things we talked about. But it's typically the ones who jump the highest who are the ones who run into those issues. Or it's like the kids who end up pulling their hamstrings are the fast kids. Or the people that have the Achilles issues are the ones that put a ton of force through their calves. So it's like you use the tissue to destroy the tissue, and it's kind of a weird thing to think about, but that's just how it is. So yeah, the long lever athletes, the really long legs, those are typically better basketball players. And I think too they have long arms because their legs are long and they're better at getting steals, and they just were built in a way to be good at basketball. So they have a love for basketball, and they play a ton of basketball. Which you look at the dimensions of the court and you look at, there's a vertical goal that's 10 foot. Everything about it is a ton of deceleration, a ton of change of direction, and a ton of jumping and landing. And all of those things just beat up the front of your knee. So doing that at a really high volume and intensity is just going to lend itself to beat that up. And for them to stay healthier, I think it comes from slowing things down, hitting the weight room, doing things to get like a health effect in your tendon, to keep your quads strong, keep your calves strong, keep your hips strong. You just check off all those boxes, and I think people's anterior knees, patellar tendons are in a lot better place.
Do you attack, like, if somebody's having like quad tendinopathy or quad tendonitis compared to the patella? Do you attack that? How do you attack that?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm curious with you.
Like a lot of my NFL guys, a lot of my 300-pound guys, my big guys, I wouldn't say a lot, but if I get the quad pain, like that quad tendon pain, it's usually with my large athletes like that. And I'm like, I don't get the pain in the front of the knee, but it's usually in the quad tendon, and it's like I'm trying to see how I attack those different.
Okay. Sometimes that quad tendon can be like a little confused with patellofemoral pain. Is it pain like immediately above the kneecap, or is it like behind the kneecap, around the kneecap?
Usually what I'm trying to describe is above,
so like right
the knee.
above, yeah. So like the quad tendon, the quad tendon pain, you usually have it with larger athletes. I would have to think on that, because actually that's something,
I do similar to what I would do with
no,
the
it is
patella.
the same. It is the exact same, because it's like for you to adapt. So the rehab is the exact same, but I think the way that it happens is a bit different, because the patellar tendon is kind of a different tendon, because you have the quad muscle that runs into the kneecap, and then it runs over the kneecap and then goes into the patellar tendon, and then the patellar tendon goes into the tibia. But you also have a section of the patellar tendon that's a ligament that goes from the patella to the tibia, and that's on the very underside, so the deep side. So it's like it is a patellar tendon, but it's also a patellar ligament. And the section, I wish I had a number on this, but the vast majority of the damage to the patellar tendon is the patellar ligament. It's the very deep undersurface where that patellar tendon is going, or the patellar ligament is going into the patella. So that's where that damage happens. For the quad tendon, it's like it doesn't have a ligament section. It's all coming from the quad muscles into the patella. So yeah, anyways, those are like, I guess the differences there. And the quad tendinopathy, it happens where the tendon inserts into the bone. The patellar tendinopathy happens where that tendon or that ligament inserts into the bone. So it's at that interface where you have a tendon-bone interface. And I think it happens there because that tendon has to kind of like wrap around. So the tendons have to wrap around the bones. But with the quad tendon, when you get into deeper knee flexion, so when you really bend the knee, that quad tendon compresses against the condyles of the femur, so the bones, the bony, the cartilage, the bones of the femur, and I think that's where you kind of get some issues. So you have this compression where it's pressing against the bone, and then you're also demanding the tendon to act like a rubber band, because you're pulling on it with a tensile load from the quads. So it's the combination, and a lot of people that get the quad tendinopathy are like Olympic weightlifters, so they're catching cleans really deep, they're catching snatches really deep, they're squatting really deep, and they're doing all of that explosively. So you can just think they're getting all of this mashing of that tendon against the bone, and then you're combining that with a really violent stretch from the quads. So yeah, for those people, if they have that quad tendinopathy, I know that it's going to be more sensitive in deeper knee flexion. That's what's pissing it off. So in the rehab, I'll just make a point to like avoid deeper knee flexion. So it's still going to be let's throw a bunch of isometrics on it. That's really tolerable, so we can work the quads really well and we can work the tendon. But let's stay away from getting that compressive effect from the condyles of the femur, because I just look at that compression as like, it's not like a positive adaptive thing. It's like you've went to the point of like really pissing this off, so let's just remove it a bit from that. I think you could look at this like the Achilles tendon. So when you have Achilles tendon pain, you can have mid-portion pain, which is a few centimeters above the heel bone, but then you can have insertional pain where the pain is right where the tendon inserts into the heel bone. So about 2/3 of the cases are mid-portion, and then 1/3 of them are at the insertion. And when you go into deep dorsiflexion, so like you're shoved and the knee goes forward and the heel's on the ground, that's like deep dorsiflexion. And that's causing a lot of wrapping around of that tendon around the calcaneus. So there's been quite a bit of research on insertional Achilles tendon pain getting better when you avoid deep dorsiflexion. You know, so you just you might give them heel inserts so that their tendon is not going to be their tendon's going to be more in like a crimp position, but it's not going to be getting that wrapping around compressive effect. And then when you do calf raises for those people, you just don't go into crazy deep dorsiflexion, but you kind of stay a little bit more mid-range and up into plantar flexion. And that just lets the tendon settle down from that compressive effect. So yeah, with the quad tendon, I think the compression is so huge versus the patellar tendon. Sure, it gets some of that, but I don't think it's as major as the quad tendon when you get into those deep positions. So that's the one thing. That's the one caveat with that is like I just would avoid deep knee flexion. If you're going to do squats, if they usually do really deep squats, shorten the range up, do higher squats, and then you can load it heavier because now you still want to get a good stimulus of leg strength and quad strength. So just load it heavier, do higher squats. And then I was recently talked to Rodrigo Scatone. I'm posting on my podcast. I'm posting that soon. And I asked him this question too, patellar and quad tendinopathy, because what are the differences? Because there's only like a few pieces of research on it. And the one piece of research really just said that when you're in shallow ranges of knee flexion, it's a lot of patellar tendon stress. It stretches the patellar tendon a lot. And then when you go into deeper knee flexion, because the kneecap is kind of sitting in the groove and it's because the kneecap is sitting in the groove and the way the patella works, when you go deeper knee flexion, you're stressing the quad tendon more. So you're getting more stretch out of the quad tendon as you go deeper. Combine that more stretch at deep knee flexion with the compression, and it's just kind of a recipe for like more provoking the pain, with the quad tendon. So yeah, I just avoid the deep knee flexion. But Rodrigo was also saying that the biggest section of the quad tendon is the rectus femoris tendon, the rectus femoris, which is that quad muscle that starts up at the hip and goes, the only quad muscle that starts at the hip and goes down to the knee. All the other quad muscles just go down into the knee. They don't start at the hip. So when you're doing something like a leg extension, you want to get more rectus femoris with the quad tendinopathies because that's the biggest section of the quad tendon. It's the most superficial. That's I think that would be the one that is having the pathology in the quad tendon, the section with the pathology.
Right.
So when you're doing like a leg extension, just lean back a lot. Set the seat back all the way, lean back. So then you're going to get more rectus femoris because the hip is in more hip extension. And then another good isometric is the reverse Nordic for quad tendon because you're keeping the hips forward and you're sitting back. So it's like you're getting a lot of rectus femoris, which is like that area you want to target. Maybe sissy squats too. If you held on to something, you could do sissy squats because you can get rectus femoris. So like any of the quad variations where you're doing them in more hip extension is going to be more rectus femoris, which is probably going to be better for the quad tendinopathies. The reverse Nordic, if you're doing that for a patellar tendon, that can kind of be problematic because the patellar tendon already hurts and now you're putting your knees on the ground and it's like, that might not feel good versus when you have the quad tendon, you're not putting a quad tendon on the ground in contact with the ground. So yeah, those are some things with the quad tendon that I thought were interesting of like trying to get more rectus femoris. And then it's like going into deep knee flexion is poking the bear. Let's just stop poking the bear. Look at it the same as you look at insertional Achilles tendinopathy. What is that provocative position? It's deep knee flexion. And then with the insertional Achilles, it's a deep dorsiflexion. Maybe let's just settle down on those for a little bit. And over time, after many months, because tendons take a long time to settle, after many months, start to dose it in a little bit, get them back to deep squats. Just do it intelligently. And then if it's insertional Achilles, get them back to deep dorsiflexion. Just do it intelligently, because you have to hit deep dorsiflexion when you get back to sport. And then a lot of these athletes, they have to hit deep knee flexion when they get back to sport. So it's not like I'm saying remove them completely. I'm saying remove them so that the tendon can settle down. And the tendon will take many months to settle down from that. And then you need to be smart of like, okay, we haven't done a deep squat in 6 months. I'm not just going to say we can do deep squats now. I'm going to say, let's try like a lighter load, a deep squat. And then listen the next day, how does that tendon feel the next day? And just make sure the pain is stable, and then try to get them back. The whole point of the tendon rehab is to push them back to normal training. You want to get them back to just do normal strength and conditioning. So that's what you're trying to build them back up to.
I think that, I was worried about their size with those 300-pounders, but you're just saying deep flexion, their position, they're in a deep flex position the entire time.
Yeah.
So that quad tendon on that compression force, they're linemen usually, like center, nose tackle, interior D lineman, they're literally just sitting in that position where it's just stressing the quad tendon, and then they want a deep squat, just adding more fuel to the fire. So that makes...
and you don't want to like completely remove squats either, because then it's like that's like meat and potatoes for leg strength, So you want to keep them in. It's just like, just give them a box that's a little bit higher and be like, if they are always doing like you could even control it. If you control the speed, that might be good too. If you just control it down really slow and then control it up really, really slow, because that's like getting rid of that really fast rubber band response. So instead of like yanking on the tendon, if you do like an ATG squat and you just bottom out and come up, that's a really violent stress on the tendon. It's almost like a plyometric, how you're storing all that energy and then you're releasing it. But if you slow down the tempo, that rubber band doesn't have that rubber band effect. It has more of like a viscous effect. So like the tendon can kind of, the tendon stress is much less, because the tendon fluid can kind of squeeze out, the individual collagen ropes can kind of shuffle around one another, figure out how they want to work. So it's kind of a more healthy stimulus when you do slow things down. But yeah, with those quad tendons, I would just give them a box and be like, we're just going to squat a little bit higher for a while, and then maybe to keep the leg strength up. If they're usually squatting like 400 pounds ATG, 400 pounds in a half squat is probably not going to be that stimulating for them. So you could even up the weight a bit, and their leg strength is going to still be good. You're just not getting that really deep position leg strength, but you're loading it heavier, so you're probably making up for it.
No, I want to be mindful of your time. One big question for us. We work a ton with ACLs, and then here in our area, most of the grafts are usually patellar or quad tendon. And so now we're dealing with 2 injuries. It's like they tore the ACL, but now they have to go in and they take a percentage of the patellar tendon, they take a percentage of the quad tendon. We're dealing with 2 injuries. I think I know the answer, but for you, everything seems like a regression model. Like it's like, let's try to get them back to training, but okay, this is as heavy as we can go, or this is as deep as we can go. This is where we're going to get to where we don't hurt the knee the next day. You know what I mean? Do you attack those tendon injuries any differently than you would if they just came in with it? Just might be a slower progression, or how do you attack that with a ACL?
Yeah, injury? I think that's it. So with these ACLs you've seen with quad and patellar, do they get a lot of pain in the tendons?
Yeah. So really, I would say when we have a quad tendon, it's like the biggest issue. I would almost say every time they get the patella pain. So even if the patellar pain, because if the quad tendon's there, or if they use the quad, we can't get it strong, fast, right? Or it just takes a lot longer to get that quad going. And because the quad's not working, the patella's on stress, right? If they use the patella tendon, now it's already stressed, it's already jacked up, and now we have that anterior knee pain to where it's like, we're having success with it, but that's always a worry of ours. And it's like, could we attack that faster?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And sometimes we'll work our way through it, and it's like, fuck that, excuse my language, but that patellar pain starts coming in, and then it slows down the rehab process, you know what I mean? To where it's like, we almost feel like we need to attack the patella just as aggressive as we do the ACL.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I think if they get a patellar graft, the anterior knee pain is going to be pretty high, but I guess that's like one of the better grafts in terms of like strength, and then you get like a bone to bone plug instead of just like a one bone on one end and then like there's no bone on the other end, so it's more reflective of what a ligament would be. So patellar grafts, probably a lot of anterior knee pain, and then the quad graft is probably going to be like the quad strength is going to take a while to come back, which
causes patellar knee pain.
Yeah,
because the quad's so weak, the quad's so weak that the the anterior knee, the patellar knee, or the patellar tendon gets stressed, so we get the pain there.
And then you have the swelling effect. So I think if you can't manage the swelling, then like that quad is never you're gonna have a really hard time getting that quad back, and you need that quad to come back because it's kind of like the quad kind of acts like a buffer for the tendon. How like when you go land from a jump or when you decel, like when they're getting back to doing those things, if their quad sucks, I think that the tendon just gets pulled on more and the tendon has to deal with more stress because that stress should go. I think what it should do is it should kind of go from like it starts like in the tibia as the body's like decelerating from moving forward. It starts in the tibia, gives it up to the patellar tendon, and then it gives it up to the quad tendon. And then the quad muscles can eccentrically dissipate that force, can eccentrically dissipate that load. But if the quad muscles are not good, it doesn't work as well, So I think that it causes like this this connection of the quad and the tendon. It's just not that good. And I think when the muscle isn't as good as it should be, I think the tendon just gets more stressed. It's just like a last ditch effort of like, we're just going to stress the tendon more. And then one thing you could see too, if that quad is really bad, the soleus muscle can do, I guess somehow the soleus muscle can kind of do the job of decelerating in those situations. So you want to train the soleus, get the soleus really strong, but it's also like that quad and that soleus work together. Part of probably the patellar and quad tendon graft rehab and ACL is like doing something specifically for the soleus, like you could do heavy calf raises, you could do heavy seated calf raises to get that soleus going. Cause if we're just always banging away at the quads and that like neglecting the calves, it's like, it's just going to be frustrating because the soleus has a way to help the quad do its job, and you want those to work together just like you want the quad and the tendons to work together. I think the swelling needs to go down, and that needs to stay down. And then it's just like they took a huge chunk out of those tendons, and tendons take a really long time to come back. I don't even know. I don't even know if there's research on does the cross-sectional area ever return back fully, or is it always like they just have a chunk out of their tendon? So you're trying to load it all the time frequently because that's what's going to get the cells to be producing more collagen, hopefully fill in that hole with the strong structure. It's just going to take a long time. I don't think there's anything major other than like if they got a quad and patellar graft, you need to be loading the quads frequently and heavy, progressing it to get very heavy based on their pain symptoms. And because you to make that patellar tendon and that quad tendon stronger, it only happens by way of getting the quads to work, bringing the quads up. And I think that little thing we said earlier with the rectus femoris muscle, so the rectus femoris, that's the section they use for the quad tendon grafts. A lot of that quad tendon is like a rectus femoris section. And then that anterior section, so the most surface level portion of the patellar tendon, is a continuation of mostly the rectus femoris muscle. So training quads in general is good. Like doing a hip flexed position quads, like a seated leg extension. If you're really seated upright, that's going to be hitting the quads. If you do a squat exercise, that's going to hit the quads. A leg press is going to hit the quads. But if you want to hit the rectus femoris, which is going to be that continuation of the tendon and part of that quad tendon, you want to do things in more hip extension. So like we said earlier with like the leaning back on the leg extension, doing sissy squats, even if you're doing split squats, that back leg, you can get a lot of rectus femoris on the back leg because that leg is in hip extension. So you could get into that position. Now this is good. If this is really sensitive, then you probably want to go the other way. And because a lot of the anterior knee pains with the patellar tendon, quad tendon, or with the grafts, when you do a lunge exercise or a split squat, that rear leg can just not feel good, can really be screaming at you because you're putting it in a bad position. But if it's not, and you can progress it good, you can really put a lot of weight on that back leg and try to keep the knee like directly under the hip, because if you put that knee and stretch it way back, I think you're just going into like this weird low back position. That's not hip extension, because that's not hip extension range of motion. That's like way surpassing it. I think you can get a lot of load through that rectus femoris on the back leg if you do like split squats or lunges, and you could even like lean back a lot. So if you lean back a lot, you're going to be putting a lot of weight on that back, rectus femoris, if they can handle it. So yeah, I think with those patellar quads, you're just trying patellar quad grafts. You're trying to load the quads a ton and give them a lot of time to get the quad strength back and the quad size back. And then I wish I had a time frame for this because it's like they had a study. They had a study on. I think it was a strongman. I don't know who the strongman was, but his quad muscles were like, compared to average Joe's, his quad muscles were maybe, let's say, like 200% bigger than the average Joe's, but his patellar tendon was only like 15% bigger. So it kind of paints this picture that it's like you can adapt the muscles easily. Muscles adapt real quickly, but the tendons always lag. The tendons always take a really long time behind muscles, and maybe this speaks to people that take steroids. It's correlated with tendon ruptures. Muscles already adapt fast, and tendons already adapt slow. When you take steroids, muscles adapt even faster, and the tendons are kind of just left the way that they are. So it's like now you have a really strong muscle and a really, like, quote unquote weakened tendon or smaller tendon. So yeah, I think you're trying to get the quad strength back, and then even when you do get the quad strength back and the size after those grafts, you still have to appreciate that tendon's lagging. The tendon is still lagging. Sure, you've built the muscle back,
Yep.
but it's like you have to still be cautious because the adaptations in a tendon to make them in a positive, the positive adaptations for a tendon happen so slow, and I think it's just a blood flow thing. Blood flow to muscles is very high. Blood flow to tendons is very low. Adaptations are very slow. But it also seems like the negative adaptations to a tendon happen very quickly. So like you could put your foot in a boot and your Achilles tendon will lose a lot of its collagen, a lot of its stiffness very quickly. But for you to increase the stiffness from a baseline takes a very long time. So it's for those tendons, it's really easy to mess up tendons by immobilizing or something like that. And it's really hard to it's not, well, maybe it's not hard. It just takes a ton of patience to put them in a positive direction.
Right. I love it. Jake, man, I really appreciate the time. I got two quick questions. Like I said, I could talk to you about that all day, but I always ask our guests a question for the next guest. And Eric Cressy, he left this one for you. Especially with all the technology coming out these days, but his was, what technologies are intriguing you right now? If you're looking at something on the tech side of things with tendons, what are the technologies, what are you looking at?
Okay. It's not going to be what you're thinking. Yeah, because there's like force plates and there's things like that, and I've kind of always been like an anti-tech guy. I've been like the Rocky archetype of like, yeah.
I knew that. That's why I thought this was a good question for you.
But the thing is actually, imaging is imaging. So it's not tech of like in a weight room. It's actually there's an ultrasound scanner I've been aware of now for a long. Jared Amflick was the first guy. Or actually, Daniel Bove, he's with the Pelicans. I went to visit him, and he was telling me about this ultrasound scanner and a UTC scanner and how they're scanning all the guys, patellar and Achilles. And I'm like, I was like, this was a few years ago. I'm like, I've never heard of this. And then he put me in contact with Jared Amflick in London, and Jared's the one scanning a lot of these Achilles and patellars. And so it's like an ultrasound. Everyone's seen like an ultrasound with grayscale where you put the probe on the tendon, you get a grayscale image. But this is a scanner. I think they started it for racehorses because racehorses have their big tendons in the back of their Achilles tendon. It's not called the Achilles tendon, but that's the way you could think of it. And I mean, they can't tell you when they're in pain. They can't tell you when they're headed down a bad path. So they image the tendons to kind of get a look at how they look. And this ultrasound scanner, it's called the UTC scanner. It gives you like a 3D view. It color codes it, so you can see exactly where there is pathology, or you can see when the tendon's overloaded and it's going through a healing process. So the tendon should be mostly collagen with like this gel around the collagen. And when you start to overload the tendon, it gets more gel, it gets more fluid because that's a normal healing response of a tissue to push more fluid, push more blood flow. And then if you continue that down, you could start to get like tears in the tendon, or you could start to get really bad damage in the tendon. And this, you don't know, because sometimes pain won't tell you. Sometimes you'll have athletes with really bad tendons and they don't have any pain. And they could go on to rupture. They could go on to get pain because it's a risk factor. So this UTC scanner, I was actually in Michigan a couple weeks ago in Traverse City. Trent Salo. He used to be with the Pistons. He has a tendon clinic in Michigan, and he has a UTC scanner. So I have my right Achilles was bugging me for a little bit. So he scanned that, and he saw like there's some pathology. I think on the deep surface of my soleus, and then he scanned my left patellar tendon because my left patellar tendon has been bugging me for a bit too. And have a history. Like I've been dunking for like a decade and abusing myself too, like purposely dunking on days where I'm in pain. I had one summer, I think 2021, where I was staying at my one of my buddies' place in Minneapolis, and we dunked every day for I think 2 months, and like I was like getting out of bed and my knees were like so stiff, and I was in so much like just so uncomfortable, but I could warm up and dunk, so I was dunking all the time. And I never really had my tendons imaged. So he imaged my left patellar tendon, and it's just a mess. Like it does not look good. And he scans it, and he's like, "Are you symptomatic?" And I'm like, I mean, it depends, but yeah, it can be pretty bad. So I think a lot of people would get it imaged and be like fearful, and it's a very negative thing. They don't want to see their scan. But for me, I'm like, I like seeing that because I'll go back to him maybe in a few months or a few weeks after like trying to be more intelligent with my loading, and let's see how it looks now, you know, because you can take these really bad looking tendons and kind of based off the things we talked about here of like being smart with your training, being variable with your training, doing some slow loading, slow heavy loading to get strain out of the tendon, healthy strain out of the tendon, you can change the structure of the tendon to get it more healthier. So that's the piece of tech that I look at where I'm like, I think that's the future of tendons is scanning them. If it could be more accessible and more frequent, you could scan these tendons and you could see who's at risk to go on to get tendinopathy or at risk to go get tendon rupture, and you could step in before that happens. So you could step in and give them a focused loading program for like 2-3 times a week, be like, do these isometrics or do this heavy slow resistance 2-3 times a week. And then you could scan them maybe a few months later and see if that pathology has cleared up. And those people are going to be much less at risk to get tendinopathy or go on to get a rupture.
I love it. That's awesome. Last one, something just here at Off the Field. We always talk about like stuff that fires us up. Like even like a little thing is like this kid's never late. You know what I mean? Or these, you know, this kid always helps clean up when he's done, or just little stuff. But with your athletes, you know, like what's one small thing that just like when they do that, like that fires you up?
Well, right now I do everything. I'm everything online. So I'm like, I consult online.
But you're getting messages, you're getting testimonials all the time.
Yeah.
Like when with your text messages, what's one of the ones that's just like, oh man, that one fires me up?
Yeah. Oh man. Dude, okay, this is hard now, and I got to think of this. I think it's anytime someone's actually somewhat well, actually I can tell you what doesn't fire me up is when people like ask questions they could Google quickly, you know, and I'm like and that's a lot of the questions with the tendons. So like a lot of the DMs are like they're kind of curious, like very small, but they're not that curious, because if you were curious you would have done a lot of homework yourself. So I think what's good is like I have a few people where I know that they've spent a lot of time researching this and they actually are curious. So going back and forth with those people, you know, yeah, I think that's it. I think it's the people who are, for whatever reason, are curious about it, like true curious, not fake curious of like, what's your opinion on this study? But it's like, no, I want you to read every study and then come to me with we can have some dialogue back and forth. So yeah, I think not even with the athletes, it's more so with like people I have on the podcast. It's like I like getting the people on that have a different perspective and have had different experiences with tendon rehabs or the way that they think about tendons.
I love it. Jake, man, thanks again. Appreciate the time.
Man, thank you.